like this to be really an opportunity for me to hear from you more than you to hear from me, because I like to learn. I'm out of my normal circle, and I'd like to learn a lot about you and why you're here and what you're up to, and get more of this enriching spirit of discourse going between plastic surgery and art. We talk about two things: caricature, which is this slight exaggeration on the way that you set up features, and we talk about, again, the abstraction, and we try to float our way around the picture to attempt to take in all of the information, all of the material, all of the little signals and pulses and emphasis that go on. I sometimes call them the poignancies of the image. It's the phrase corrective surgery. And what we're looking for in this instance is the opposite, what does catch the eye. And yet the concept of catching the eye would be to notice the unique characteristics of each individual inside of the framework of the face, because this is a general face, a general head, but what about each person is special, is beautiful and unique? And if we can grab onto that somehow and then carry it through and allow it to deliver us to a different location, then we get this even more interesting, greater harmonic intercommunication in the image. And I think there's a lot of that in what you're doing as well, this kind of idea of shifting something around and having it fit into the harmonic mapping of the face, as I see it. Because you're learning things, and sometimes you get into problems. And I think it's the love for the practice itself that, in a way, triumphs over the challenges within.
Zach, can we ask, in the context of that, what do you think the biggest misconception is that people have about learning how to draw and paint?
As you start learning the form, memorizing the form, you become more conscious of the subtleties in, let's say, like the Lord Leighton sculpture. You start to look at the ear in ways that you wouldn't, only because you're capable now. Stuff like that happens when you are as interested in the technical narrative and the way that the material moves and how it responds to your purposes. I just find that very stimulating, interesting.
And we were chatting on Tuesday about shadows, and where in surgery we try and hide incisions in the shadows of the face, because there's no such thing as scarless surgery. But I see where you're drawing, you can see the shadows where you want to hide things and the spaces where you want less scarring, and it was just amazing to see that sort of how, your art and how we try to match that up with our surgery.
I had the honor of watching Neil do an ear reconstruction, which was spellbinding. It was truly incredible. And there were two moments really for me, and one of them was when you, at the very end, when you filled it, when you drained it, and everything kind of came together, and it was just something.
There's a name for that,
yes.
isn't there?
There's a name, but I'm not sure we can go there tonight. We are on film, and this may be a PG-rated audience, so in a friendly context. But the other thing is when Musa and Sam pulled the costal cartilage out of the patient.
Can you talk a little bit about restraint, and so, because you can see so much, you're right up onto there. How do you sort of, what's the process around what you're electing to leave for later on, and what you want to lay in now for?
That's another good question. There is a lot of interest in that from where I teach. It's finished when I become the spectator, but it pushes me to a place where I approach it extrinsically. And someone else said it's finished when everything flows into everything else, which again goes to that idea of what catches the eye. Nicolaides said they were called flash poses, and so he would do these flash poses with his students, and their objective would be to capture the essence of the model up on the model stand. That's gesture, that's the energy. And it's a very tricky thing to try to go after, because you recognize it as a kind of force, a presence. It's like trying to capture stage presence with the model.
Ears or rhinoplasty, where we try to have anatomical shapes, but also non-anatomical shapes. And I can see with your drawing, you have many lines where you wouldn't really see lines before, but you use that anatomical and non-anatomical form.
Yes, it used the anatomical and non-anatomical form indeed, and I was so just jazzed by looking at the way that you went in this direction to create the non-anatomical form, to project the tragus right off of the side plane of the head, which was just amazing, because so much of it is about that. you find the anatomical, but then the non-anatomical might be this little capture of the zygomatic coming off of that helix. And if that works in an artist's tradition, my advice is usually to go and try that twice. It isn't necessarily, when you're studying drawing, painting, or the design arts, it's not about practice, it's about applied practice. What you said, sustained practice yesterday, Bran. It's so important to sustain the practice through research and reading. There's a lot more reading than I think my students might realize. Lightness in some ways to me is a little bit like that proportion thing. I'd like to hold off on total committal, and I think that probably drives a lot of you who are in the room tonight nuts by saying, why doesn't he just draw in that edge and then we can go and have some more wine? See, I can read your mind, can't I?
Could you make us feel better by saying something that you're unhappy about?
Without telling me.
Yeah, apart from the AC.
Yeah, aside from sweating like everybody else, when you get a drawing degree, somehow it's assumed that you can't teach painting. And I don't see that one art form as a sub-art form of another. In many circumstances, it seems as though the sketchy versions of the official paintings are more compelling than the paintings themselves. And so I'm just intrigued by that. You know, like the versions of the paintings that you'd see that would be preparatory, or the drawings that went into paintings, like we talk about the Living Sibyl a lot in New York, because the Met is very fortunate to own the original Living Sibyl. And that drawing is just about, if not more, fascinating than the Sistine Chapel. It's so magical. When I see something done that feels like it's photographically real, it doesn't have as much resilience to me. I don't lay awake at night thinking about Richard Estes' paintings of perfect photographic street corners and that kind of thing. I think about people like Michelangelo, like I said, Kathy Kollwitz, and some of these incredible artists, Pontormo, because they had true poetry behind what they were doing, and they were able to connect on an emotional level, like a gut emotional level. And I feel like AI somehow isn't going to get that. At least I hope it doesn't. It may be that it can, but how do you teach a machine or some sort of machine lexicon how to feel? One of the first things that I did was reintroduce structural drawing, because it felt like the antidote to working from photographs. It felt like if you could challenge an image with your mental framework and graft your sense of space into the image, so you could think about the paper like you're reaching into a light box, then you wouldn't be subjected to the randomness in some ways of the camera lens. I think the camera lens is beautiful and teaches a lot, particularly in film, but in terms of structural aptitude, it does feel like it influences what I'm doing, but I don't quite know why. It's a great question.
Do you think it relates to when you first started the lecture talking about rhythm and things like that, and I guess there is literally a rhythm coming, and that naturally through the body will transfer through the hand into what you're drawing and things like that?
I think that you're onto something, and I feel like that's what we do with this. You might have looked at a chin a million times, but suddenly you see something. Like, there are a couple little markers along the sagittal midline that are just amazing in her, that I'd love to get better, that I think I'm only seeing because I'm going after it with expectation that I don't know enough and that I'm here to learn. I'm here to discover and make something worthy of her.
As we draw towards the end, can I bring it back to plastic surgery again, as we always do? Plastic surgery is form and function,
Okay.
and to look at the beauty of utility and function. And so things that were created by nature or created by us purely for function, where function was the main driver.
What would you like your final form to be in terms of your artistry?
I'd like to be able to do one masterpiece in my lifetime. You know, and just one.
Do you have an idea of what that would be?
At this moment, I feel like continuing on the path that I'm engaged in will take me there. I kind of like not knowing what it's going to be, because the other thing that maybe scares me a bit is, what if I do make one? And I still got a lot of time. What am I going to do? I guess it gets absorbed and adopted by humanity. Like that marvelous drawing by Kathy Kollwitz again from Mother and Child. And it's sort of taken on this quality, like in our lifetime, to draw the ear, they would have to conjure that up as a structural form, not so much an ear they saw in a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And that motivated a lot of that drawing.
Ali and Anya, thanks so much